You're sitting in front of a fan that just pushes hot air around, watching the little numbers on your electric bill climb, afraid to touch the thermostat because you already know what August is going to cost you. Your shirt is stuck to your back. The house feels like an oven, and the last thing you want to do is turn on a real one. I know that feeling because I lived it, summer after summer, in a rented upstairs room with one window that barely opened. So here's what I learned, and it changed everything for me. The poorest households in this country survived brutal, killing summers with no air conditioning at all, and they did it mostly through what they put on the plate and in the glass. The right meals cooled their bodies from the inside, kept the house from turning into a furnace, and cost pennies. That knowledge got buried the moment cold air became something you could buy by the ton. I didn't believe it either. I thought food was food and heat was heat. But an old woman who fed a whole family through the 1930s showed me different, and by the end of this, I'm going to hand you a forgotten drink written down in farm records from the 1800s that field workers swore kept them standing in 100-degree heat. This isn't for people with money to spare. This is for you, right now, with what's already in your kitchen. Let me take you back to the first time I understood it. I was maybe 26, dead broke, sharing a stove with 2 other tenants, and the July heat had settled into that top floor room like it planned to stay till winter. I was cooking the only way I knew how. Boiling, frying, standing over a hot burner at 6 in the evening because that's when normal people eat dinner. And every night I made that little room hotter than the sidewalk outside, then laid awake sweating in it. The woman downstairs, everybody just called her Miss Ada. She watched me haul myself up those steps one evening looking half dead, and she said something I never forgot. She said, "Honey, you're cooking your supper and cooking yourself at the same time." Then she told me to come down and eat with her. Her place was cool. Not cold, but cool, comfortable, and her stove was stone cold. She hadn't turned on a burner since morning, and on the table was a full meal that had never seen an evening flame. That was the night I stopped believing that comfort had to be bought and started believing it could be made. Because here is the thing nobody tells you. The heat inside your house in summer isn't all coming from outside. A huge share of it you are making yourself 3 times a day, right there at the stove. Miss Ada understood something her mother taught her during the Depression, and her mother learned it from women who had never known any other way. You don't fight the summer with cold air. You stop manufacturing heat, and you eat in a way that helps your body shed it. And once you see how they did it, you cannot unsee how much money and misery we throw away doing it wrong. Let me start with the simplest thing she showed me, because it saved me the most right away. Miss Ada did all her real cooking before the sun got high, in the cool of the early morning, and then she didn't touch that stove again all day. She'd boil, bake, and simmer everything between 5 and 8 in the morning while the air was still soft, while the room could shrug off the heat before noon. By the time the day turned cruel, her food was already made, sitting covered, waiting to be eaten cool or at room temperature. This wasn't her invention. This was standard practice in poor and farming households for generations, and there's proof of it in the written record. If you go back and read the household bulletins that university extension services were mailing out to farm wives in the 1920s and 1930s, they spelled it out plain. Do your heavy cooking in the early morning. Cook once, eat 2 or 3 times. Never heat the kitchen during the hottest hours. These weren't suggestions about comfort. In a house with no cooling, in a summer that could kill the old and the young, this was survival written down as a chore list. I started doing it, and I felt like a fool for not thinking of it sooner. I'd get up, cook a pot of beans, boil my eggs, bake whatever needed baking, all before work, all before the heat. Then that evening, when my old self would have been standing over a screaming burner making the room unbearable, I ate food that was already done. My room stayed maybe 10 degrees cooler on those evenings. 10 degrees, for free, just by moving when I cooked instead of what I cooked. But cooking in the cool hours only solves half the problem, and Miss Ada knew it. Because you can move your cooking to dawn all you want, and you'll still suffer if the food itself is fighting your body instead of helping it. That's where the real forgotten wisdom lives, and that's where most people, even the frugal ones, have absolutely no idea what they lost. Here's the part that sounds strange until you understand it. The kind of food you eat changes how much heat your own body produces trying to digest it. A heavy, greasy, protein-loaded meal makes your body work hard, and that work throws off warmth from the inside hours after you eat. Scientists have a plain name for it. They call it the thermic effect of food. It just means your body burns energy to break down what you swallow, and that burning makes heat. Fatty, heavy meals produce more of that internal heat and hold it longer. Now think about what that meant for a poor family with no way to cool down. They couldn't afford to eat a heavy hot supper in July and then lie there cooking from the inside while the walls held the day's heat. So they didn't. The old summer eating pattern in hard times households leaned light and watery in the worst heat. Cold vegetables, fruit, cucumbers, which are almost all water, buttermilk and clabbered milk, cold soups, bread already baked, meat used sparingly, more as flavor than as the center of the plate. People today look at that and think it was just poverty, that they ate that way because they couldn't afford steak. And sure, money was part of it, but it was also wisdom dressed as poverty. That light, water-heavy summer eating wasn't only cheaper, it literally kept their bodies cooler because it gave them water and gave their digestion less heavy work to do in the heat. Miss Ada put a bowl of cold cucumbers in vinegar in front of me that first night, thin sliced, sitting in a little brine with onion, and a glass of cold buttermilk beside it. I'll be honest, I thought it was old folks' food. I thought it was what you ate when you had nothing. Then I ate a full plate of it, drank that buttermilk, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was suffocating after supper. I felt light, I felt cool, I slept. That cucumber dish cost her almost nothing. A cucumber, a splash of vinegar, an onion, a pinch of salt, pennies. And it did more for my comfort than the fan running all night. But cucumbers and buttermilk are just the doorway. Because once I started asking Miss Ada questions, she opened up about the real backbone of poor man's summer eating, the thing that let a family go all day without lighting a fire even once. And it starts with a decision most of us have completely forgotten how to make. The decision was this: cook in bulk, in the cool hours, and then eat from that same cooking cold for days. Miss Ada would cook a big pot of beans or peas early on a Monday, not for one meal, for most of the week, and she didn't reheat them each time, which would mean firing the stove again and heating the room again. She ate them cold, or barely cool, dressed up different ways so it never felt like the same food twice. Cold beans with vinegar and onion one day, cold beans mashed onto bread the next, cold beans with a little chopped tomato after that. This idea of eating beans and grains cold in summer runs straight back through the poorest kitchens in history. During the Depression, when a nickel had to feed a family, extension services and relief workers were teaching people to cook dried beans in quantity because they were the cheapest, complete, filling food a person could buy. A pound of dried beans cost almost nothing and fed a family for days. And in summer, the trick was to cook that big batch once, in the morning, and live off it cold, so you never had to heat the house again to eat. I did the math on my own life once I started this. I was spending real money on little convenience meals and on running that stove every single evening. When I switched to cooking a big pot of beans twice a week in the early morning and eating from it cold, my food spending on those weeks dropped by more than half, and my evenings stopped being torture. 2 problems, 1 old habit, solved together. Now I can hear the doubt, because I had it too. Cold beans sound like sad food, but that's only because nobody ever taught us how the poor made them taste good. It's all in the dressing. A splash of vinegar wakes them up. Raw onion gives them bite. A little salt, little fat stirred through, some black pepper, maybe a chopped tomato or a spoon of relish. Suddenly, it's not sad food. It's a cold bean salad. And people pay good money for that in restaurants now without knowing their great-grandmother ate it out of necessity in a hot kitchen with no fan. So we've got the cool hour cooking. We've got the light, watery foods. We've got the big cold batch that carries you for days. But there's something running underneath all of this, something even more important, and it's the thing that keeps a body from going down in real heat. It's not food at all. It's what you drink. And it's the reason the next part matters more than anything I've told you so far. Because you can eat perfectly and still collapse in the heat if you're drinking wrong. And most people, then and now, drink exactly wrong when it's hot. Here's what happens. When it's brutally hot and you're sweating, you lose water, sure, but you also lose salt and minerals through that sweat. If you only pour plain water back in, and a lot of it, You can actually thin out your blood and end up feeling worse, weak, headachy, cramping, dizzy. The old field workers knew this in their bones long before anybody had a scientific word for it. They knew plain water alone didn't hold you up through a full day of labor in killing heat. So they made something else. And this is where I want to bring in the drink I promised you at the start, the one written into old farm records, because it's the single most useful forgotten thing in this whole story. But before I give you the recipe, I have to be straight with you about something, because it's the whole reason this knowledge got buried in the first place. None of this was forgotten by accident. It was forgotten because somebody eventually made a lot of money selling us the alternative. Once cold air could be sold by the machine and the kilowatt, and once cold sugary drinks could be sold by the bottle, the old free methods became an embarrassment. They became what poor people did before they could afford better. And a whole culture built on spending taught us to look down on the very tricks that had kept our grandparents alive. Think about it. Nobody makes a dime when you cook at dawn and eat cold beans and drink something you mixed from vinegar and water. There's no profit in you being comfortable for free. The profit is in the machine on your wall, the bottle in the store, the bill that comes every month whether you can pay it or not. So the knowledge that made you independent got quietly pushed aside, generation by generation, until a young man like me could stand in a hot room cooking himself half to death and have no idea there was another way. Miss Ada's generation was the last one to hold all of it as ordinary everyday sense, and she looked at me like it broke her heart that I'd never been taught. That's the feeling I want you to sit with, because that's what's really being taken from people like us. Not just money, the ability to take care of ourselves without paying somebody for permission. If this way of thinking is already speaking to you, I want you to know that I've gone much deeper into all of it in my book, Poor Man Smart, and the follow-up volumes, Poor Man Mastery and Poor Man System. These aren't polished lifestyle guides written from a comfortable desk. They're the kind of hard-won, practical knowledge that Miss Ada carried, written down so it doesn't get lost again. You can find the link in the description if you want to go further than what fits in a single video. But right now, let me start with the simplest thing she showed me, because it saved me the most right away. Now, let me get to that drink, because this is where I need you to lean in. I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking this all sounds fine for somebody with a stocked kitchen, but your cupboard is nearly bare and payday is still days off, and even a few dollars for ingredients feels like too much. I hear you. I have counted out coins on a counter to see if I could afford a single onion. So this next part is built for you specifically, for the emptiest kitchen and the thinnest wallet, because that's exactly the situation this drink was born to solve. It's called switchel. Some old records call it haymaker's punch, because it's what farmers drank while bringing in the hay in the worst heat of the year, and it goes back a long, long way. You'll find switchel mentioned in American writings from the 1700s, and it was already common then. By the 1800s, it was the standard drink handed to field hands during haying season, poured from a jug kept in the shade at the edge of the field. This was the working poor's water for the hottest, hardest days, and they trusted it to keep them upright when plain water wouldn't. Here's what's in it, and I want you to notice how little it takes. Water. A spoonful of vinegar, cider vinegar if you have it, but any vinegar helps. Something to sweeten it, and traditionally that was molasses, because molasses was the cheapest sweetener the poor could get, or a little honey, or even just sugar. And if you had it, a bit of ground ginger. That's the whole thing. Water, vinegar, a sweetener, and ginger if you've got it. You mix it in a jar, a spoon or two of vinegar, and a spoon or two of the sweetener into a big glass or a quart of water, stir, and drink it cool. That's it. And here is why it works, why it beat plain water in the field. The vinegar and the molasses together put back a little of what your sweat takes out. Molasses especially carries real minerals, potassium, and others, the very things you lose when you sweat all day. The ginger settles the stomach, and some of those old folks swore, helped you handle the heat. So instead of just flushing yourself with plain water and washing out your salts, you were replacing them. You were drinking something that actually held you up. I made it that first summer with the cheapest ingredients on earth. A jug of vinegar lasts months and costs almost nothing. Molasses is cheap and lasts nearly forever. Ginger you buy once. For the price of one cold bottled drink from the store, I could make switchel for weeks. And on the days I drank it, instead of just sweating through glass after glass of plain tap water, I genuinely felt steadier in the heat. Less of that draggy, headachy, wrung-out feeling. Miss Ada drank a version of it every hot day of her life and lived a long one. That's the drink. Water, vinegar, a spoon of molasses or honey, a pinch of ginger. Written into farm life 200 years ago, carried through the Depression by people who couldn't afford to lose a single worker to the heat, and nearly erased by a cooler full of bottles you have to pay for. Now it's yours again, and it cost you almost nothing. But the drink is only half of how they fought the heat from the inside. There's a second piece that sounds completely backwards, and it's the one that took me the longest to believe. When I finally tried it, I understood why the hottest countries on Earth have been doing it for thousands of years. Here it is. To cool down, sometimes you eat something warm and spicy on purpose, and you let yourself sweat. I know how that sounds. It sounds insane. When you're already boiling, why would you eat something hot and spicy? But stay with me, because there's real science under this, and the poor and hot climates have always known it. When you eat spicy food or drink something warm, your body responds by sweating a little, and sweat is your body's own built-in cooling system. As that sweat evaporates off your skin, it pulls heat away from you, and once it passes, you actually feel cooler than you did before. A warm drink or a spicy bite can leave you cooler 10 minutes later than a cold one does. This is why so many of the hottest places in the world, places that have endured killing heat for all of human history, have national dishes that are spicy and traditions of drinking hot tea in the afternoon heat. It's not backward. It's the most advanced free air conditioning ever invented, and it runs on your own skin. The poor everywhere figured it out because they had to. Miss Ada didn't call it science. She'd just put a little pepper in things in high summer and drink her coffee even on hot mornings, and she'd say it made the afternoon easier to bear. She was right, and now I do it too. A little heat in the food, a warm drink earlier in the day, and you let the sweat do the work it was designed to do. Free. Built into you. No machine required. Now, put this all together, because this is where it stops being a list of tricks and becomes a whole way of getting through summer that our great-grandparents would recognize instantly. You cook in the cool of the morning, once, in bulk, so your house never turns into an oven in the evening. You eat light and watery in the worst heat. Cucumbers and tomatoes and cold beans and buttermilk, food that carries water into you and gives your body little heat-making work to do. You drink switchel instead of just plain water, so you replace the salts and minerals your sweat steals instead of washing yourself out. And when the afternoon is at its cruelest, you use a little warmth and spice to trigger your own sweat and let it cool you the way nature built it to. Not one of those things costs what an air conditioner costs to run. Not one of them shows up on your electric bill. And together they carried entire families through summers that would frighten us now, summers before anyone had cold air on demand, and those families didn't just survive them. They worked through them, in the fields, in hot kitchens, in houses with tin roofs, and they lived to teach it to the next ones. But I saved the best for last, because there's one more method Miss Ada showed me, and it's the one almost nobody has heard of. It's the secret finale I promised you, and it comes straight out of the way the poorest households stored and served food before refrigeration was something they could afford. When I tell you how simple it is, and how well it works, you're going to wonder why it was ever allowed to disappear. Let me set it up, because the how matters as much as the what. Before electric refrigerators were in every home, and for the poor that was a lot later than people think, plenty of families still didn't own one well into the middle of the last century. Keeping food and keeping cool were the same problem solved with the same trick. And that trick was evaporation. The same reason sweat cools your skin, they used to cool their food and their drinks and even the air around them for free, using nothing but water and a breath of moving air. Here's the method, and here's how you do it this weekend with what you already own. Take an ordinary clay flower pot, the plain terracotta kind, the cheap unglazed reddish clay that soaks up water, or any porous unglazed clay vessel. You soak it in water until the clay itself is damp all the way through. Then you put your food or your jug of drink inside or under it in the shade, ideally where a little breeze can reach it. As the water slowly evaporates out of that clay surface, it pulls heat away from whatever is inside, and it keeps the contents cool, sometimes shockingly cool, far cooler than the air around it. You just re-wet the clay when it dries. That's it. This is ancient. Cultures in the hottest parts of the world have used unglazed clay pots to cool water and preserve food for thousands of years, long before electricity existed anywhere. And here's the part that ties it to our own hard times history. Poor households in this country used the very same principle to make what they called a cooler before they could dream of owning a real one. They'd wrap a jug in a wet cloth and set it in a breeze, or set a damp cloth over a bowl of butter or milk with the ends sitting in a dish of water, so the cloth stayed wet by drawing the water up. The evaporation off that wet cloth kept the milk from turning and the butter from melting through the hottest part of the day. There were even simple wooden safe boxes, the poor called them by different names, built with wet burlap or cloth walls kept damp from a pan of water on top, sitting where the wind could pass through. The constant evaporation kept the whole inside of that box cool enough to store perishables in the dead of summer with no ice and no electricity at all. Farm families and desert households relied on these, and university extension services and homemaking guides described how to build them for people who had no other way to keep food. I built the cloth version myself, the simplest one, and I could not believe it worked as well as it did. A wet towel draped over a jug of switchel, the bottom edges sitting in a shallow pan of water so it stayed wet by itself, set by my one window where the air moved. Within an hour, that jug was cool to the touch on a day when everything else in the room was warm. It cost me nothing. I already owned the towel, the pan, and the jug, and I had cool drink all day without a refrigerator working itself to death and without a single cent on the meter. Now sit with why this is the finale, why this is the crown of the whole thing. This method cools your food and your drink, which means you can eat that light, watery, cooling food I told you about and actually keep it cool without refrigeration. It cools the switchel that replaces your minerals. And the evaporation itself, if you set a wet cloth where the breeze passes into your room, cools the very air around you a little, the same way it cooled those food safes. It's the missing piece that makes everything else in this video work. Even if your power is out, even if you can't run a fridge, even if you have nothing but a clay pot or an old towel and a pan of water. This is the knowledge that a spending culture was happy to let you forget, because a wet towel and a clay pot don't come with a monthly bill. It survived because ordinary poor people, in the hottest places and the hardest times, kept doing it when they had no other choice, and passed it hand to hand to people like Miss Ada, and Miss Ada passed it to me. And now, right now, it belongs to you. So here's what I really handed you today. Not a list of sad old poverty recipes. I handed you back the ability to get through a killing summer on your own terms, with your own two hands, out of things you already own, the way people did it long before comfort came with a price tag and a shut-off notice. You are the kind of person who refuses to be helpless, who refuses to be told that dignity and comfort are things you have to keep buying back every single month. That's why you watch this far. That's who this is for. Now do one thing for me. Tell me in the comments whether you've ever heard of switchel, that haymakers punch the field hands drank, or whether this is the first time it's ever reached you, because I honestly want to know how close we came to losing it for good. And if your grandmother had her own hot weather trick, a food, a drink, a way of keeping cool, put it down there too, because somebody reading needs it. If any of this reached you, subscribe and stand with the rest of us who are quietly taking this old survival knowledge back, one forgotten trick at a time. Because next I'm going to show you how those same households kept their homes warm through savage winters without pouring money into the heating bill, using the exact same kind of buried wisdom, and once you see it, you'll never look at a cold room the same way again. This video gave you the overview, but inside the poor man's circle I hand you the whole no-cook summer method, every meal and that field worker drink, picking up right where we stopped. You can ask me your own question, and I answer you myself, a real person, never a machine. You won't be alone in here with me. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen. Cancel anytime, one click, no risk.